All right, guys. Hey, welcome back to episode 2 of Rolling with T-Bone Presents, A History of Witches. I hope y'all are enjoying it and you're not too bored. But if you're not bored and you are here watching, let's dive into it.
T-Bone roars like a thunderstorm blast. Engine growling as the trees rush past. Wheels on fire called the mountain's face. The legend rides with a reckless grace. T-Bone's shadow cuts the sky through the peaks where
Halloween, guys. Y'all know one of my favorite times of the year. Halloween brings back the great memories for me. I can remember, being a young man, enjoying Halloween, frolicking through the cemeteries, hanging out with my buddies, and pretty well much just enjoying the freedom that comes along with stuff like that. Because it seemed like Halloween was the one time of the year that you could just basically be whatever you wanted to be. And it's in that vein. I get a little nostalgic every now and then, guys, and I know y'all who have been with the channel for a while, y'all have recognized that about me, that I do get nostalgic. And of course, I've been getting into the frame of mind for Halloween has always kind of been a big deal for me. And I want to take just a little bit of time here before we get into episode 2 to kind of talk about that with you guys. Now, as y'all know, Halloween being my favorite time of the year, you guys who have been here, y'all have heard me talk about my time when I was on the fire department working in haunted houses. We would do the haunted houses. My time as I played the character Freddy Krueger. And Halloween has never been one of the holidays that begins at its given time. I always used a lot of time to, I guess, mentally prep to get into the Halloween frame of mind. I can remember me and a buddy of mine, once the fall started kicking in, we would dive into the ghost stories and read the books of ghost stories and watch all of the horror movies on TV, which was fine because I was a horror movie junkie, as most of y'all know. I love my horror movies, but I always, even in the time I was playing Freddy Krueger in the haunted house, I always spent a certain amount of time getting mentally prepped to do that part. So I would start somewhere usually in probably mid-August to late August, all the way through the month of September. I would use that time to, study my character, study the movies, just watch horror movies in general, just to get myself into the right frame of mind. And man, I recall those times as a kid, being nostalgic. I went back and I have actually been watching old Halloween commercials from the 80s and 90s. Commercials? Yeah, well, there's nostalgia in that because guys in here like me and the Recycled Hooligan and Slickhead, if he's in here, he's only a couple years older than we are. We came up in a time of a lot of where things began. I can remember, which I'm sure so can those guys, I can remember the very first movie, Hocus Pocus. While the dialogue might have been corny, the story was certainly not corny. It was a fun, light-hearted story. And, of course, two teenage boys in the early 90s, Sarah Jessica Parker was shooting all of us in the heart with that witch get-up that she had on. But I look back on a lot of that stuff, and I watch a lot of that stuff mentally preparing. And thank God for YouTube, because without YouTube, all of that stuff would be lost to time. So I usually spend quite a bit of time just sitting and watching 80s and 90s TV shows that had to do with Halloween, commercials. I just consume all of that stuff because it's not just prepping to do this episode or the next episode. It's just stuff that I really enjoy. And, hey, I get a little bit nostalgic about that. You know, I think about a buddy of mine, James Cavender. Me and James grew up together over in Ducktown, and now, as kids growing up in Ducktown, there was a lot of places to go trick-or-treat, so you would get a full bag of candy. But man, we would, like I said, we would trick-or-treat, and then we would break out the ghost stories, and he had bought a book one time called The Ghost Stories of Tennessee, and man, I bet we read that book between us. We read that book so much that it fell apart, but we loved that stuff. We loved the mystery, and we loved the horror of Halloween. We loved the jump scaring. We would play in the cemetery, and we would, 10, 15 kids in the neighborhood, we'd all jump scare each other. And it was just a fun time, and a time, but like again, for y'all who've been here with me for a while, it was one of those times through my childhood that really holds a significant place for me. So I do get a little bit nostalgic about it, and I'm enjoying doing these episodes of the history of witches. I find this subject to be very interesting because it shows the taking things out of context to the next level. Just because you had a wart, a mole, a rare body deformity, you could automatically be accused of being a witch. And in a lot of cases, you would be burned at the stake or hung for being a witch. So this stuff all kind of fascinates me. And, it's good to have a healthy amount of excitement about this kind of stuff, or it's just going to be lost on me. Tonight's episode, which is episode 2, last week you remember I said at the end of that episode that James was going south. Of course, I'm talking about King James. Now, King James in going south, and I'll preface this just a little bit before we get on the bike here in just a minute. By the time he went south, he had written a book called Demonology. And it would be this book that would set the course for the next 100 years in the witch trials. But when James went south, he was going into a very different place. So, y'all just hang tight while we get squared away. We're going to get on the bike, and then we're going to talk about some of the things that happened when King James went south. And I want to say this. I'm not here to argue the religious points of things, and I'm not here to talk about the philosophy of things, but the King James that I am referring to would go from King James VI to King James I. Now, he is not the King James who wrote the Bible, but he is the King James who commissioned the Bible to be translated into English, which would bring it into being the King James Version of the Holy Bible. And here in the South, I know there's the Continental Bible, there's different Bibles, but I've only ever read the King James Version. That's the one that I was raised to believe in, and that's the one that we believe through historical records actually probably is the most historically accurate translation into English. So, but I'm not here, like I said, I'm not here to argue that with you. To each his own. I know here in the South, you're going to be hard pressed to find people who read any other Bible other than the King James Version. So the King James that I am talking about in this series is the King James who commissioned the Bible to be translated into English. But now with that, y'all just hang tight for a split second while I get us on the bike and we get out on the road. All right, guys, as we hit the road on Big Papa going to take us on this episode. And Big Papa's got to have some fuel in him. Apparently, the last 135-mile adventure I went on, riding Big Papa, I didn't stop for fuel. So we're going to have to make a beeline for the gas station. Oh, man. But yeah, guys, we talk about James going south now. James would have to go, well, he wouldn't have to, but he did. James would go south to England And King James VI of Scotland would become King James I of England. So now, why would he become King James I of England? Well, Queen Victoria, who was his cousin, and who had served as the Queen for 45 years, had passed away. And Queen Victoria had passed away without any heirs to her throne, and James was the next in line to become the monarch. So James would become King James I of England. Now, for the people of England, when James became the king, it was a new exciting time because they had come off the 45-year reign of Victoria, and Victoria was aged. So they were, the people of England were very interested to know what their new king was going to be like. You know, what did he enjoy? And of course, you know, what did he believe in? You know, a monarch's beliefs were very important back in them times. And of course, we know from the last episode that King James was a Christian man. As I stated a second ago, commissioning the English translation of the Holy Bible into English. But the book Demonology, now guys, the book Demonology would be a book that James would print, that basically would take everything that James had learned from dealing with the witches in Denmark and Scotland. And so the people in England who wanted to know what their new king was all about would have this, you know, not a full, big, huge book, but what they would have considered back then a pamphlet talking about the things that James very much believed in, such as witches, demons, the devil. James believed very much in that. So the people of England would have gotten a hold of a copy of Demonology. Now, in the book of Demonology, there would have been people who would have looked at that book and who would have thought that maybe King James was a little bit of a fanatic. There would have been others who got a hold of that book, and they would have thought, hey, you know, he believes the way we believe. He sees things the way we see things. But one person, and that's kind of who this episode's going to focus on, one person would take the book of Demonology and King James's belief in these things, and he would completely misread King James. Alright guys, sorry about that. I had to get a little go-go juice, but now and like I said right there before we had to stop, you have to realize these folks were going to try to take advantage of King James's book Demonology, but it wouldn't go good for them. And one guy in particular, kind of who this episode's about, is a guy named Brian Gunther. Now, Brian Gunther would go before the king, and he would make the accusation that his daughter had been bewitched by 3 women in the village, in his village. Now, you got to think about the kind of the time that the accusation was made, guys. A lot of times that's all it took. In the beginning of this was just the accusation. An accusation and a, you know, body blemish, you were a witch. So Brian Gunther had probably gotten hold of a copy of Demonology and read it, and he just assumed that King James would just take him at his word that these 3 women had bewitched his daughter. Now, he had went before the king and said that his daughter would go into convulsions, that pins, like metal pins for sewing, would come out of her hands and out of her mouth. And he named the 3 women. Now, whatever James whatever can be said about King James's book, Demonology, or about King James himself, King James believed that when it comes to this kind of stuff, that the innocent should be proved innocent just as much as the guilty should be found guilty. So Brian Gunther went in and talked to King James and made this accusation under the assumption, we have to assume, of course now we weren't there so we don't know exactly, but you would have to assume that Brian Gunther went in and made this accusation under the ideal, at least for himself, that King James would just believe him and these women would be brought to trial, found guilty, and burned or hung. But King James did something totally different. What James done was he actually sent for the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was an actual skeptic of witches and all that kind of stuff. But he sent for the Archbishop of Canterbury to have Brian Gunther's daughter examined. You know, hey, James was like, okay, well then you're making this accusation. If this is what's going on, then I'm going to go through the due process of legally finding out, you know, not only are the women that you're saying bewitched your daughter are guilty, but I'm going to send away and have this the Archbishop come in and tell me if she is faking or not. Now, the Archbishop come in, I believe her name was Elizabeth. If not, I'll put it up here on the screen if I can remember. But the Archbishop spent some time talking to her, going over everything. I'm going to assume, I wouldn't imagine that he would have threatened her that, you know, if you are lying, you're going to end up in bad trouble, or I don't think it would have been anything like that. Now, I could be wrong. He could have just completely threatened her and bullied her. But just in a short amount of time from the time that the Archbishop arrived, did his examination, he reported to James that there wasn't nothing wrong with the girl. And not only was there nothing wrong with the girl, but that she had been bullied and threatened by her father to go in and make this claim that these women had bewitched her. Now, why Brian Gunther would have wanted these women punished or would seek vengeance against these women, you know, we could use imagination. You know, perhaps they were three cousins or sisters, and maybe he had advanced to one of them and they had turned him down. Maybe he had tried to advance all three of them, seeking sexual favors or whatever, and all three of them had turned him down. So when James came to town at the book Demonology, he would have thought that he was just going to be able to get his revenge. Now, history don't tell exactly what happened to the daughter. I'm sure she was reprimanded a little bit, but history does tell us what happened to Brian Gunther. So, Brian Gunther, guys, as we get over here on some new asphalt, Brian Gunther would completely underestimate who James was, and now in underestimating who James was, he would pay a price. Now, like I said, history never told us about his daughter, but we know that James didn't play around. For wasting the king's time, Brian Gunther was thrown in prison for 3 years. Yeah, he spent 3 years in prison for wasting the king's time. Now, I'm sure this was a kind of a aha moment for James, and surely he had probably had them. But what makes the Brian Gunther case so kind of unique was that this was the very first witch accusation in England. The Brian Gunther case was the very first one in England, so that's why I thought it deserved a little bit of special attention, because it showed the people of England that yes, your king takes this stuff seriously, but no, you're not going to come in here and jerk the wool over my eyes. So James, King James wasn't playing around. But guys, there it is, the Brian Gunther case, episode 2 of Rolling with T-Bone presents A History of Witches. Got his bike parked there and he's down there fishing. But man, I hope y'all are enjoying this, guys. I put a lot of work into this. Not just editing wise, but getting on the bike, getting off the bike, setting up a tripod maybe for a 30-second shot, then having to take it down, get back. I didn't anticipate working this hard doing this. But man, oh man, guys, I love the Halloween season. Like I was talking there in the opening of the episode, this is a special time of the year for me. It always has been. When I got a lot of memories, I had talked a little bit there. And of course, I've made episodes in the past about, working, doing a haunted house and stuff like that. It was just always a real special time. When we all have those times, and times of the year. For some people it's Christmas, for some people it's Thanksgiving, for some people it may be just a certain person's birthday. But Halloween has always been one of those times that for me, and of course, like I said, those of y'all who've been with the channel, y'all know. And if you're new here and you maybe don't have an idea what I'm referencing when I reference stuff, feel free to go through and, watch some of the older episodes of Rolling with T-Bone, which is what I try to encourage most people to do, is to, before you subscribe to this channel, go watch some of the old stuff. I know one of my newest subscribers, he looked at the subscriber count and whatever it is, 749 or 50, whatever it is. I don't even know how many subs I have at this point. But he was like, man, your content's good. How do you not have more subscribers? I don't know. I'm not really, I'm not for everybody. I mean, not everybody just, is going to like what I do, the content I put out. Because it was put out, and I don't know, I may have talked about this a little bit in other videos, but, and I think I did mention it, talking about is motovlogging dying. I think it's slowing down. I don't know that it's dying, but I have never been one of the ones, and if you're new here, you'll know this, and the older folks already know this, the ones who've been here for a while. I'm not really a trend follower. And when it comes to the content that I shoot, a lot of times with me, what you see is what you get. I don't, while I do try to do special stuff in that, for my episodes, I'm not just going to go all out, because, this channel's free. I don't charge nobody for subscribing to my channel. I don't have a Patreon. I don't have a merchandise store. I don't have any of that stuff. It's just me. That's what you get. And a lot of times, it's hey brother, riding a motorcycle. A lot of times, you start getting into all that stuff, and people are doing all these things, and you kind of see that they're false, they're fake, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But with me, what you see is what you get. I'm no frills. There's not going to be no big spectacular stuff going on in my videos. I'm just a down-to-earth dude who likes to talk about stuff sometimes and loves to ride his motorcycle. So that's why I always say, before you subscribe to my channel, go back, watch some of my other episodes. And if you want to go back a ways, you could go all the way back to this time last year, and you'll find my the Halloween series that I did last year, where I introduced cryptid content onto my channel, a subject that I've been studying for years with the cryptid content. But if you go backwards from here, and you'll find out, you'll see us talking about all the cryptids that we covered in that series, and then I just kept the content going after the Halloween series was over with, because you know, it was fascinating. That's why in that opening at the beginning when my music's playing, as you know, we cover paranormal, we cover UFOs, we cover cryptids, just, you know, whatever kind of tickles my fancy or whatever I think's interesting and I can actually make an episode out of it is what I try to do. So yeah, just a simple old boy from North Georgia. But you know, I appreciate all my subscribers. You know, my views don't reflect my subscriber count, and nobody's does. You know, and my content don't reflect my subscribers. You know, not everybody out there who watches my channel and enjoys my content, you know, they're not always going to agree 100% with everything that I make content about, but you know, they enjoy it, and they enjoy coming in. And kind of one of the things about my channel that kind of differentiates me from other channels is I premiere my Monday episodes, and I try to do premieres because that's a chance for everybody to come into the premiere chat, whether I'm there or not. They can come in, hang out, say, hey, how are you feeling today? You know what? Because we have built up such a friendship community doing this. And that's kind of what it, you know, what all comes down to. You don't always have to agree with everything, and you don't always have to you don't always have to jump on there and drop a comment just talking about how much you don't agree. Oh man, sometimes it's just enough to say, hey, you know, that's not for me. Recycle Hooligan, one of my long time hooligans, been with me, God almighty. When I started my incline, I found Recycle Hooligan over on Shade Tree Surgeon channel, and I started my incline climbing and making content and growing slowly. I was growing slowly but surely, but Hooligan has been with me, I've been at this for nearly 6 years. Hooligan's probably been with me for 5 years at least. And I've been with him just as long. We've watched him relaunch his channel. And one of the coolest things about the Recycled Hooligan, and I often give him credit for this, and I'll tell him in his comments, I love when Hooligan reviews stuff like the equipment that he buys. And he's never sponsored. He's never, you know, these companies aren't sending him this stuff saying, hey, say something nice about this and we're going to send you something else. No, he buys this stuff out of his own pocket, and he tells you and me about it. And if it's something that he thinks is cool, he'll say, hey, this is well worth the purchase. And then if it ain't so good, he'll say, you know, buyer beware. Use your own judgment when you buy this product, because if it doesn't perform the way he, you know, as advertised, or the way he thinks it should, he'll tell you. But Hooligan's one of the real ones. He's been around with me for a while. Neil M is another who has been around for a long time. Georgia Hillbilly been around for a long time. Most of the folks that, if you're new in here, you see in the premiere chat tonight, most of these folks like Sick Bastard and Neil M and Julie Smith, most of these folks have been with my channel for a while. So if you, like I said in one of the episodes I did a while back that I wasn't there, I think it was a Saturday episode, where I wasn't there, but I had said in the video, you know, if y'all have any questions, you need to know anything, these folks in here can tell you pretty well much what you need to know. But alright guys, well, episode 2 is in the books. That means we're getting close to Halloween. Every time we get an episode in the books, we're getting closer to Halloween. So the next episode, guys, we're going to fast forward and go a little further into the future to what might actually be one of the most famous witch trials to ever take place in England. But you just have to come back next Monday night to find out what that is. So guys, I'm going to dump it off right here, and I'm going to say we got this episode in the bag. As always, I want to thank you guys for coming in and hanging out with us. If you're new here, Go back, check out some of the old videos. If you like what you see, hit the subscribe button. But guys, until the next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and hey, thanks for watching.